frequency 001, captured on day 2851. 38 minutes and 14 seconds of continuous transmission. Capture quality at 97.8%, the highest ever recorded at this station, as if the signal had been prepared to be received, as if someone had made sure it would arrive clean. It took me 2 days to start this report, not because of missing data. The data is all here, complete, organized, ready for documentation. It took me 2 days because this is the kind of file that, once opened, can't be closed the same way. You'll understand when you get to the end. The protocol requires me to maintain analytical distance from the content. I'll try. I can't promise I'll manage. The analysis of the origin universe for this frequency returned something that had never happened before at this station. The system classified sigma white as a divergent timeline of terrestrial origin. Nothing different from standard protocol so far. But when I ran the structural comparison against our own timeline, the system generated a similarity index of 93.6%. For reference, the most similar universe I had cataloged before this frequency had an index of 71%. 93.6 means that sigma white and our reality are almost the same thing. Same geography, same history as far as the analysis can reach, same physics, same biology, same languages, same countries, same historical milestones. The divergence, the point where sigma white went in a different direction from ours, is so small that the system couldn't identify it, not because it doesn't exist, because it may have been a single person, a single decision, a single morning where someone woke up and did something different from what they would have done here. There was one measurable difference between the two universes. Just one that the system was able to isolate with enough confidence to register. In sigma white, there is a researcher. Here, she doesn't exist. She didn't die. She didn't take a different career path. She wasn't born in another country. She simply doesn't exist in this timeline. And in sigma white, she spent the last 6 years doing exactly what I do here. Exactly. I'll present the transmission in the order it was captured. I won't break it into segments the way I normally do, because this time, the order matters in a different way. Every minute of this transmission changes what the previous minute meant. So let's start from the beginning. The first 5 minutes are a report, a female voice, middle-aged, 40, 45 years old, based on vocal analysis, clinical tone, technical vocabulary, but not inaccessible. She's talking to be understood, not to impress. She identifies herself only by her title. Lead researcher, subsonic monitoring station, project with no name. She calls it only the project. And then she starts describing the project. And I had to pause the playback, because what she described in the first 5 minutes is this: an underground station built originally for another purpose, equipped with monitoring systems for frequencies and ranges not cataloged by the conventional spectrum. Operated by a small team, she doesn't say how many, dedicated to capturing and cataloging transmissions of unidentified origin. She calls these transmissions frequencies. And then she says something that caused my analysis system to trigger an alert at a level that had never been activated before. Frequency 0 is the point of origin. That's where everything begins. That's where everything points. Frequency 0, the name of this station, said by someone in another universe who has no way of knowing this place exists. From the 5th minute on, the researcher begins presenting her findings. I'll document the key points in the order she presents them. First, in Sigma White, the project has existed for 6 years. It started as a marginal program within an institution she doesn't name directly. She just calls it the institution. Irregular funding, reduced team, results that in the first 2 years were insufficient to justify continuing. In the third year, something changed. The frequencies started arriving with more regularity. Signal quality improved without any equipment upgrades. And this is the point she emphasizes, returning to it 3 times over 12 minutes. The frequencies started arriving in response to specific conditions inside the station. Not randomly, in response. As if something on the other side was learning when to listen. I had to listen to that section 4 times. Because what she describes is identical to what happened here between day 1200 and day 1400. I didn't document it that way at the time. I called it progressive improvement of the capture system. She has a different name for it. She calls it mutual calibration. The idea that the act of listening, when done with enough consistency and method, teaches the source to transmit better. That we are not just passive receivers, that our attention changes what we receive. I don't know if I agree with that interpretation, but I can't rule it out. At the 17th minute, the nature of the transmission changes. The researcher stops presenting project data and begins talking about a specific discovery, the one she calls, without any drama, the main finding. I'll present what she said as faithfully as the system allows. In Sigma White, after 6 years of cataloging, the project team identified a pattern that cuts across frequencies from completely different universes. Universes with distinct physics, distinct biology, distinct history, with no obvious point of contact between them, but with one element in common. In every universe they cataloged, at some point in that universe's history, there is a record, fragmented, incomplete, but consistent, of something she describes as the prior event. Not a specific event, not a catastrophe or a discovery or a contact, a state, a condition that preceded the existence of everything that came after. And the hypothesis she presents, with the caution of someone who understands the weight of what she's saying, is that this prior state didn't end, that it still exists, that what we call universes, realities, timelines, are structures that formed inside that prior state, not separate from it, inside it. She uses an analogy the system translated with 89% confidence. She says, imagine you've always lived inside a room and never knew the room had walls, that the walls were invisible and intangible and didn't interfere with anything you did. But the walls exist. And on the other side of the walls, there is something that has always been there. The frequencies that reach us don't come from other rooms. They come from the walls. I need to be honest about what I felt when I heard that for the first time. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. Like hearing someone describe a dream you also had, but never managed to put into words. At the 29th minute, the researcher stops doing science. What follows is personal. She talks about how long she spent at this station, about what it's done to her, about the things she can no longer see the way she used to, not because she lost something, but because she gained an angle of vision that can't be undone. She says, there's a specific kind of loneliness in knowing things you have no one to tell. Not because people wouldn't believe you, but because some information changes the person who receives it in ways you don't have the right to choose for them. She talks about the colleagues who left the project in the early years. about how she only recently understood that their leaving was a way of protecting themselves, and that she respects that. She talks about a specific morning. She doesn't say when she woke up and realized she had crossed a line, that she had reached the point where she could no longer imagine stopping, not because she was required to, because what was on the other side of the walls had started to feel more real than what was inside the room. And once that happens, she says, you don't go back. Not because you can't, but because it doesn't make sense anymore. I listened to that section more times than the others, not for analysis, for another reason I won't document here. In the last 3 minutes, the researcher does something that wasn't in the protocol of any report I have ever received. She speaks directly to whoever is listening, not to her team, not to the institution, not to an internal record, to whoever is on the other side. She says, if you're receiving this, it's because the system worked, because the calibration we spent the last 2 years developing was right, because somewhere beyond what we've been able to map, there is someone listening the same way we listen. She pauses, then says, I don't know who you are. I don't know where you are. I don't know if we're from the same timeline or if we exist in reality so distant that this transmission took longer than I can calculate to reach you. Another pause. But if you made it this far, you know what I know. And then you understand why I had to transmit this before it was too late. She stops talking for 12 seconds. Then, quieter, they found the station. I don't have much time. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. The equipment is already being shut down in pieces. I can hear the systems going offline one by one out there. And then she says, keep going. Don't stop. What you're doing matters in a way that goes beyond what any of us can measure. Keep going. 4 seconds of static. And then, almost inaudible, she says one last thing. The system captured it at 61% confidence, below the standard threshold for official documentation. I'm registering it anyway. She says a name. It's not her name. It's mine. I'll document the implications of this frequency in the order I process them. First implication, the existence of a parallel project in Sigma White, developing the same work as this station, using the same methods and reaching the same conclusions, suggests that what we do here is not accidental. It's not the result of unique circumstances. It's something that emerges in universes similar enough to ours, in an almost inevitable way. Someone will always listen. The question is what they do with what they hear. Second implication, the hypothesis of the prior event, that what we call universes exist inside a state that precedes and contains them, is not verifiable with this station's resources, but it's consistent with patterns I've observed across multiple frequencies without being able to name what connected them. She named it. Third implication, and this is the one that cost me 2 days of silence before I could write it. If the transmission was directed, if the mutual calibration she describes is real, and if 2 years of development were invested to get this signal to a specific receiver, then she knew I existed. Not the station in general, me. The name she said at the end is not a common name. It's not a name that appears in any public document associated with this project. It's a name I use in very specific contexts. Contexts that should not be accessible to anyone outside this installation. I won't repeat the name in this record, but I will document what it implies. She wasn't transmitting to just any receiver. She was transmitting to me. which means that at some point in Sigma White, she had information about the station and about who operates it, and I don't know how. There is a fourth implication that the protocol requires me to register, even though I'd rather not. If the Sigma White project was forcibly shut down, if what she described in the final minutes is what it appears to be, then what they discovered was important enough for someone to decide it couldn't continue. And if the same pattern applies here, I'm not making a prediction. I'm documenting a variable I can't ignore. Frequency 0. Closing report on frequency 001. Sigma White classification maintained. Final file status. Open. Level 3. Continuous spectrum monitoring at point of origin. There has been no recurrence of the signal since initial capture. I don't expect there will be. The question this file leaves open is not technical. It's not about physics or the nature of frequencies or the hypothesis of the prior event. The question is simpler and harder than any of those. She knew my name. How? The possibilities I can construct are three. First, in Sigma White, there is or was someone who had access to information about the station through channels I can't trace. A leak, an infiltration, something that connects the two universes in a way that isn't purely physical. Second, the mutual calibration she describes goes beyond what even she understood. That the act of listening doesn't just improve signal quality, but creates over time a bidirectional information channel that operates below the threshold of conscious detection. That she knew my name because, at some level, neither of us mapped. We had already communicated before. Third possibility, and this is the one the protocol requires me to register but that I would prefer to ignore, that the name she said wasn't learned, that she always knew it. That at some point in this research, in some frequency I haven't yet cataloged or didn't recognize when it arrived, I was the one transmitting, and she was the one listening. Frequency 0, file 001 closed. Day 2853. Spectrum monitoring active. One last note, outside the protocol. She said to keep going. I'll keep going. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from knowing things you have no one to tell. Not because people wouldn't believe you, but because some information changes the person who receives it in ways you have no right to choose for them.